Well, on the face of it, it was a pretty straightforward Grand Prix win for Red Bull. Max Verstappen, Sergio Perez scoring yet another 1-2. Sergio's race coloured, if that's the right word, by an unsafe pit release from the one and only pit stop they had, switching from medium tyres to hards as a result of the intervention of the safety car quite early in the race. And he was released just in front of Fernando Alonso. Fernando lost no time in saying on the radio, wow, that was close, we nearly had a crash. And he was duly penalised 5 seconds. But that was no drama for Red Bull. Perez really quick today, as I've been saying all weekend. Not as quick as Max, but looking very good in his backup role in that number 2 position at Red Bull, and easily beating, even with that penalty, Charles Leclerc, who finished a gallant third for Ferrari. I think gallant's the right word. He really drove well. Very few mistakes. Well, we didn't see any mistakes. I'm assuming there were a few. Set fastest lap on the last lap of the race, which would have annoyed Max Verstappen probably, because Max too at the end of the race was really quick, but a tenth slower than Charles. But Max was cruising at that point, so no real issue. So Charles, yeah, drove beautifully to be P3 for Ferrari, establishing Ferrari clearly now as the team most, not saying likely to beat Red Bull, the team that's made the most improvement in terms of getting a bit nearer to Red Bull over the winter. Certainly pulled ahead of Aston Martin, McLaren and the factory Mercedes team. P4, I thought, a really underrated drive. Excellent drive by Oscar Piastri. Not even given a mention when it came to Driver of the Day rating. To beat, in a straight race, exactly the same strategies, to beat Fernando Alonso and George Russell, 2 serious racing drivers behind him, Aston Martin and Mercedes respectively. And Oscar just superb, particularly in the closing laps when Fernando, about 4 seconds away, said on the radio, I'm in qualifying mode now, which is a sort of everybody stand back, I'm going to do my charge. But Oscar just matched him lap for lap. I've used the word superb, so I won't say that again. It was just a dazzling drive, I thought, to beat that opposition. And let's put it in some context as well, because the safety car was induced by quite a big shunt in the end by Lance Stroll, who made a perfunctory error that he shouldn't be making at this stage of his career, hit the apex of the last corner, which is a tight left-hand hairpin. And as a result of that, broke the left front suspension. And then he had no chance of controlling the car, and he drifted off to the outside and hit the Tech Pro barriers on the outside, which brought out the safety car. That was lap 7, so it was quite early in the piece. But most of the runners, except Lando Norris, who had made a pretty dismal start, looked like he was going to get penalised indeed. I've got to say here, he did one of these things where he moved and then braked, and he was still short of the box line in which he was supposed to be. And initially, the graphic came up incorrect grid position under investigation. Then it came up jump start under investigation. And then it came up no further action taken. So that's an interesting one. I can't remember the last time a car has moved before the red lights went out and hasn't been penalised, regardless of where its wheels are relative to the white line. So that was, Lando got away with that, so that was good. Anyway, as a result of that, he lost momentum off the line quite obviously and lost a few positions. So they kept him out when the safety car was deployed, as they did Lewis Hamilton, who'd made a pretty good start. He was running in company with George Russell. Everybody else of note came in and switched to hard tyres from the mediums in which they'd started, which they then ran till the end of the race. That was quite an early stop, and that was a long ask for the hard tyre. Not necessarily because it was going to degrade, but because it was not an easy tyre to get to work and to get up to temperature, and it was not an easy tyre to manage, as it turned out. Because in the mid-phase of the race, well, it's probably 2/3 of the race if you look at the total number of laps, there's no doubt at all that Lewis Hamilton on the mediums and Lando Norris still on those old mediums were the 2 drivers with the most comfortable car. I'm not including the Red Bulls here because, of course, they were in a class of their own. And yes, they may have found the hard tyre a little bit difficult, but even so, they were still 3/4 of a second a lap ahead of everybody else. So let's not even talk about that. But what this did, Lando and Lewis being on the medium tyre, everybody else being on the hard, was bring into focus the differences between the cars. So at the restart, it was now Lando Norris leading because he hadn't made the pit stop. And he couldn't sustain that against the Red Bulls. Within 2 or 3 laps, both Max and Sergio were passed, and that was done and dusted. The race was over. But then Charles Leclerc, on his new set of hard tyres, caught Lando Norris, but he couldn't do anything about passing him, and they ran round and round and round like that for a long time. Lando driving really well. I guess at this point still wondering if he was going to get the penalty or not, so not an easy time of the race for him in that respect. But he drove really well. Classic Lando Norris, lovely touch, longer corners than Charles Leclerc, who looked really good in the Ferrari. But he couldn't do anything about passing Lando until Lando's tyres really started to go away, despite DRS. And he was in the DRS zone a lot. And what this tells us, of course, is that the McLaren does not have a great top speed, as we've been saying since Bahrain, and certainly throughout the Saudi weekend. It's been the slowest in a straight line of the quick runners. And the Ferrari, as I pointed out yesterday, hasn't been that quick in Saudi Arabia either in a straight line. So because of that, although Charles probably had a bit more downforce, a bit more grip through the fast corners, he was pretty good under braking, he still couldn't do anything about passing the McLaren because the top speed of the Ferrari, and this is the key point, the top speed of the Ferrari isn't that great. So that was that. And eventually Charles, of course, Lando's tyres did go off. Charles pulled off a nice clean pass, beautiful pass actually, and third place was his. And then 12 laps from the end of the race, Lando came in for a set of soft tyres. And as it turned out, that was probably the best tyre strategy. If everybody had run medium soft, it would have been a pretty good race for everybody, I think, but they didn't, of course. They went from medium to hard. But in Lando's case and Lewis's case, it was from medium to used softs. Neither of them had new sets of soft tyres, but they came in within a lap of one another. Anyway, we'll get on to that in a second, because the other little cameo, of course, was what Lewis Hamilton was doing. And what Lewis was doing was leading Oscar Piastri at this point. And Oscar knew, of course, that Lewis was going to be coming in. But again, there was absolutely nothing Oscar could do to get past Lewis. He certainly got alongside him in DRS, particularly in the approach to turn one. But when it came down to it, Lewis's braking was superb. His judgment was superb on those well-used medium tyres. And Oscar just didn't have the top speed again, even with DRS. He was incredibly good through the medium speed and high speed corners, changing the direction of the S's, really, really good. But because McLaren is considerably slower, or was considerably slower in Saudi Arabia with the setup they had in a straight line, he couldn't do anything really about doing a clean pass on Lewis Hamilton. And a couple of times he had to go around the outside into one and then ran wide and had to give the position back to Lewis. A little bit like Lewis versus Max in 21, but anyway, we won't go there at this stage. So that was an interesting thing. The Mercedes, because it's got its top speed advantage, they've taken downforce out of the car quite clearly, and they've got a top speed advantage. It was actually quite a good race car if you were on the right tyres. And George Russell, of course, at this point was on the hard tyre because he'd come in and done this sort of statutory pit stop that the others had done. And I guess that's one reason they didn't bring Lewis in, because they were running very closely, and to do a stacked pit stop would have killed the race of one or the other. Anyway, getting back to the point, we then finally saw the difference between a McLaren and a Mercedes in 100% Technicolor clarity at the end, when they were both out, Lando and Lewis, nose to tail, Lando in front of Lewis on these used sets of soft tyres. And there was everything to gain. There was only effectively 10 laps to go, so they're both flat out. And they were very, very close. Lewis, on his first flying lap, he came in one lap earlier than Lando, was almost past, but didn't get him. And then they got to the middle section of the lap, the high-speed corners, the medium-speed corners, and Lando just pulled away. And jaws at the Mercedes garage just dropped. And that was it. And there is the big message of the race. Even at Saudi Arabia, where there's a circuit with 3 DRS zones, Lewis couldn't get past Lando. Lando was so quick, so much quicker through the quick corners in terms of grip level and the downforce they were running, they were able to generate on the McLaren, that he was just pulling away half a second a lap just on that part of the lap. And then Lewis would close up in DRS, he'd close up on the last corner, but he couldn't do anything about it. And what does that tell us? Well, I think it's an embarrassing day for the factory Mercedes team, to be honest, because there they got beaten by their customer team running a setup that was clearly the better setup for the race. Oscar Piastri P4 and Lando Norris in a straight fight against Lewis on the same tyres effectively beat Lewis. And that is the data they'll be taking back to Europe now. So Fernando Alonso P5, as I say, for all that talk on the radio about him in qualifying mode and this is great. I mean, he got beaten by Oscar Piastri in a McLaren. That's what Aston Martin, that is the reality. The cold reality on a Monday or Sunday morning is that Fernando Alonso, flat out in qualifying mode, Spanish Buccaneer mode, got beaten by Oscar Piastri in a McLaren. And yes, he beat George Russell, had a very quiet day. He kind of matched everything Fernando did, but he couldn't do anything about it either. You know, he was there, he was pushing hard, but on those hard tyres, I just guess the Mercedes just didn't feel right for George to really be able to push even Fernando, let alone Oscar Piastri. And towards the end, of course, both Lando and Lewis were catching them. but they couldn't do it. It was, in terms of the strategy, obviously, it was always going to be a disadvantage to have to make that pit stop. So it was an interesting race. And just to sum up all those points, and putting aside Red Bull, who were just superlative in every dimension, Ferrari definitely did the job today in terms of best of the rest. Really good job. We'll get on to Oliver Bearman in a minute. And then McLaren. McLaren did an excellent job. They came up with a car, a little bit like Adrian Newey used to go to Monza in his early Red Bull days, knowing that it wasn't going to be great circuit for them in terms of power, but just setting the car up to be really quick out of the parabolica with quite a lot of wing and downforce. And it was always a good car around Monza. And you go to Saudi Arabia and you would imagine take wing off and long straights, but they were McLaren running a lot of downforce, relative downforce, terrible top speed, but beating the factory Mercedes, which were better in top speed, but obviously just no good in terms of, but couldn't match McLaren through the medium and high speed. And Aston Martin, yeah, I don't know, just sort of between the two probably. Disappointing race, I think, from Fernando, and a disappointing race, obviously, from Lance Stroll, who made this ridiculous error that he shouldn't be making at this stage of his career. A little bit like the one Lando made last year in qualifying, Q1 last year, when he did exactly the same thing, hit the apex of that left-hander, that last corner, but he didn't hit the wall on the outside on that occasion, but it broke something on the McLaren. But for Lance to do that in the race, and he just started to pull away from a group behind him as well. He was kind of on his own, so it was a quick car. Aston Martin, certainly a very good point-scoring car, so that was a real blow for them, I think. Now on to Ollie Bearman, who drove superbly. They put him on softs at the start because they did have a new set of softs there with all the the time loss with Carlos Sainz, etc. And he made a good start. He was aggressive. He was all over the traffic around him, and he was up there looking at P10, P9 for most of the race, and eventually finished P7. Really good drive. A couple of times he ran wide in sort of Lewis Hamilton, Max Verstappen, like going into turn one, trying to get a few passes pulled off. But he was quick, and he set his personal best lap on his second last lap of the race. So he's fit, he's consistent, he did the job, he stepped in at the last minute. He didn't obviously get to race in F2, which is a shame for him, but congratulations to Enzo Fittipaldi, who won that race. The Fittipaldi name, wow, brilliant day. But a great day for Bearman and Ferrari, really, because it just shows the amount of work that has gone into developing a driver who's behind the scenes and just step in the car and do that job. Really good. All credit, I think, should go to Jock Clear there, because he's one of the guys who really is involved now with that young Ferrari driver academy. Very, very good job. Lando and Lewis finished 8th and 9th, and 10th, I'm pleased to say, was Nico Hülkenberg in the Haas Ferrari. Kevin Magnussen had one of those typical Kevin races when he qualified pretty well, as we know, and he was just so aggressive in traffic. It's just like, hasn't anybody learned that you don't pass Kevin Magnussen? And if you do, he's going to make it very difficult for you in the next corner. And he had a couple of incidents. He got covered with so many penalties for supposedly causing an accident that he was leading Nico, and quite correctly, they got on the radio to him and said, look, you've got so many penalties now, Kevin. Just as soon as you see Nico in your mirrors, let him pass, because he's got a chance of finishing in the points. And he did exactly that. And I thought he was going to go ballistic, but he was actually quite calm about it. And he actually said at the end of the race, I'll try and be a bit tidier in Melbourne. So very good team result for Haas, in that Kevin gave Nico that pass. Nico then went through and finished P10 and scored a point for Haas Ferrari. And in the second race, really good. I mean, everybody else, Pierre Gasly retired even before the start of the race, his gearbox had gone, and the Williams were scrapping with Ocon, and the Visa Cash App Red Bulls were okay, but not particularly spectacular, and that was it. A rather messy back of the field. But getting back to the front, wow. I feel as if doing these videos now, it's very easy to say, oh well, boring race, Max Verstappen, easy win. It's so difficult to do justice to the quality of the work that he puts in on a regular basis, let alone the team behind him, and how good that car is, and how well they plan their weekends, and how well they can think of what's going to happen on lap 27 of the race, when it's still half an hour into first practice on Friday or Thursday, whatever it is. And that's the beauty of where they are at the moment, in that where they are with that car and with the success and the knowledge they have of that car. Just wonderful to watch. And Perez too. You know, Perez with that penalty, still, there was no way he wasn't going to be second in that Grand Prix, and he was a pretty good second, you know, a pretty, very professional second. I think that's the way to phrase it. So suddenly all the talk about, oh yeah, Perez is going to be replaced, has all gone out the window. Although I did notice right at the end when Max was lapping quite a lot of the back markers, I did notice that Alex Albon thinking, oh, Red Bull, have I still got a chance? Am I going to go there? Going wide on the marbles. And it wasn't a straight bit of road either. It was quite a quick bit of road, but just giving Max so much room on the marbles, and Max just breezed through. I'm sure that the people at Red Bull saw that and thought, ah, yeah, good guy, good guy. So there we are. Melbourne, be a different story again, won't it? But looking forward to that. 2 weeks now, got a bit of a break. All the teams go back to Europe now. And good to see, finally, final point needs to be made, good to see Carlos Sainz in the Ferrari garage, showing he's fit and well and putting his foot in the door, obviously, as a driver who'll make his return in Melbourne. But they're congratulating the Bearmans, father and son, after the race, as indeed did Charles Leclerc. What a day that was for the young 18-year-old Englishman. Now it's back to Formula 2. Probably be quite boring for him, but anyway, there he is, back to Formula 2. But there is a star of the future, no doubt about that. Thanks for watching. Thanks to Jetcraft. Thanks to Pitbox.io. See you soon. I'll be doing a live stream probably early next week. See you then.
I'm dancing till the sun comes up. I don't care what's in my cup. Tonight I'm doing what I want. I'm sorry I'm not heading home. I feel so good on my own. We'll take your pick and